Hello and welcome to MEELive. I'm Tamara Hemani and today is Thursday, October 23rd. Today we're asking, can public pressure deliver justice for the people of Gaza after nearly 2 years of war? Today, we are bringing you to Istanbul, where my co-host Mathilda Mallinson is reporting on the final session of the Gaza Tribunal. The gathering is a civil society initiative aiming to seek justice for alleged atrocities committed during Israel's 2-year-long war in Gaza. Over the coming 4 days, eyewitnesses and experts will present evidence supporting their allegations that Israel has committed genocide and other crimes against humanity against Palestinians living in Gaza. Mathilda has been speaking to experts at the session, and she's here today to tell us what the tribunal is and whether its work could actually help bring justice to the countless victims of Israel's war in Gaza 2 years on. Mathilda, it's great to have you with us from Istanbul.
Hi, Tamara. It's great to be joining you, even if it's not in the studio today. Yes, I am at the Gaza Tribunal.
Great to have you with us either way. If you could just explain for our viewers quickly what this tribunal is and what it aims to achieve.
So over the next 4 days, we will be hearing from experts and eyewitnesses who are presenting essentially evidence to a jury, but it's a jury of conscience. So while this is judicial in format, it's not in power. There is no power of accountability that this panel of legal experts can enforce on the people being considered as criminal. Nevertheless, there are goals that the tribunal has besides judicial accountability. One of them is archiving, right? There is an immense effort going on here to archive the crimes, and not just the crimes against life, but against culture, against education, against the environment, and also the extent of complicity. We're not just talking about political or military complicity here. They're talking about media complicity. They're looking at complicity of universities, complicity of corporations. And thirdly, this is a call to action. That's very clear in the presentation that there is an imperative being expressed here for civil society around the world to take action for justice for Palestine. The message is Palestine needs you. And it is very hard not to feel moved by the eyewitness testimonies that have been played today and will be played during every session of this tribunal. We've heard from people, we even heard posthumous accounts. One person who we heard from live was Haider Eid. He's a Palestinian professor, was at the Al-Aqsa University before he was displaced 4 times. And he shared with us today his experience of losing dozens and dozens of family members and colleagues.
The personal loss has been too tremendous even to grasp. I have lost 54 relatives, cousins from the Eid clan. And I have lost 39 colleagues from Al-Aqsa University. And I have lost more than 280 students from our university, including some of my best students, literature students. I also have lost all my belongings, my flat, my neighborhood, my family home, my children's school, and my university. 2 days before the implementation of the so-called ceasefire, Trump's Gaza plan, I had received a message from a friend who is still in southern Rimal. He wrote it while the Israeli genocidal forces were decimating Gaza City. And I want to quote what my friend sent to me. He said, "The world feels exceptionally dark tonight, and I'm struggling to breathe, to stand, to think. I feel like I'm floating through space, like I have lost my footing."
That's certainly incredibly moving testimonials coming there, and I'm sure you'll only hear more throughout the coming days. I wonder now, are all of these testimonies and is all of this evidence now being shared because this ceasefire agreement has been signed and the war is considered over for all means and purposes. So this is a moment to kind of expose the events of the past 2 years. Is that the kind of approach here?
The timing does seem coincidental, but it is just that they are very clear that that is not their stance. Their stance is not that the war is over, the crimes have been committed, and now is the time to retrospectively assess them. The tribunal itself actually began in November 2024. There was a previous session in Sarajevo in May. And while there is a ceasefire in place now, and Donald Trump has expressed that this will be a lasting and durable peace, proof of which we are yet to see, the position of the tribunal committee is that the crimes are continuing, crimes of apartheid and of occupation, potentially of genocide, potentially even of the war itself. I spoke to Richard Falk earlier, who said that the very terms of the ceasefire are colonial and therefore essentially criminal as well. Here's what he had to say.
The struggle of the Palestinian people for their basic right of self-determination is not over. It is continuing, and it is being deceived by the kind of Trump diplomacy evolved from an ultimatum, not from a negotiation. Hamas was given 72 hours to accept the ceasefire for the return of the hostages. Israel would, being assured that if it would go along with the ceasefire as a public posture, it could continue to provoke Hamas into some sort of response that would allow the ceasefire to be broken by Israel at any point. Threat diplomacy, which rewards the perpetrator of genocide and puts the Palestinians in the position of being further punished despite their extreme victimization over this period. So it's within that context that we want to reach world public opinion and strengthen the victory of the Palestinian people in what I call the legitimacy war, that is a war of symbolic politics concerning legality and morality that has generally prevailed since World War II in anti-colonial struggles.
He used the term that the war of legitimacy, that's a term he's used a couple of times. And I think it tells us something about why this tribunal is happening and who they're really speaking to besides the jury themselves and the broader public. Richard Falk, he said something very interesting to me, that while they are going for judicial professionalism, they're not going for neutrality, because there is a moral and humanitarian crisis here. That obviously separates it from other courts of law.
So they see this as
rather an imperative.
The showcasing of that narrative then. And so it's removed from maybe the judicial power, but it's intended more to kind of expose those crimes, to highlight those crimes. And I suppose from what you've said about them seeing this as extending beyond the framework of this war, they want these crimes to be considered in a longer view of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory and its system, which is accused of being apartheid in the occupied West Bank. So I guess in that sense, this is, even though the past 2 years have been devastating, this campaign, in its aims, is much larger than that.
Yeah, and the issues that are being considered are also much, much broader in timeline. You had Noura Erakat just appearing on the screen there. She, for example, took it back to the Nakba of 1948.
The brazenness of Israel's current campaign is predicated on the normalization of the Nakba. The international community accepted Israel's claim for legal exception in 1948, despite emerging through clear violations of the terms of Resolution 181, as well as international humanitarian and human rights law, and transformed Palestinian refugees into a humanitarian issue whose fate would be determined through political negotiations. The past is the present.
And I wonder, that was, again, a very powerful overview of exactly what's at stake here for Palestinians. I wonder who else might have been speaking at this event, and did you, in fact, hear from any Israeli perspectives on this issue?
We did. We heard from Israeli-British historian who actually dated it even further back to the 1917 Balfour Declaration. And we also heard from Jeff Halper, who is the head of ICAN, an American-Israeli civil action group. And he even talked about considering crimes of the future, potential crimes of the future. So I think he talked about an ongoing process by Israel to forcibly transfer Palestinians from Gaza, trying to make the case that the Zionist state of Israel is inherently one that is committed to ethnic cleansing, and therefore blowing open the scope of the judicial inquiry. I mean, he makes an appeal to the jury, again, that is not one you could hear being made in a court of law. Here's what he said.
Genocide and ethnic cleansing being part of the process of Judaization, Israel is openly negotiating with a number of countries, including South Sudan, Ethiopia, Libya, and Indonesia, to accept all or most of Gaza's 2.3 million people. This is an active campaign on the part of Israel today. This isn't just some idea in the air. In collaboration with the Trump administration, Israel's presented detailed plans for the redevelopment of Gaza, virtually devoid of its current inhabitants. All this compels the tribunal, in my view, to hold the very system of Zionist settler colonialism accountable.
So as you said, there's that long view, the view to the future that, in their view, Israel cannot emerge unaccountable from these 2 years of war. I wonder then how you would see the work of initiatives like this, because it's not alone. We've seen other civil initiatives. I'm thinking of the Hind Rajab Foundation, other kind of civil society-led legal initiatives to hold those accused of crimes accountable, or at least expose those crimes on a global platform. I wonder how you see initiatives like that and what you believe they can offer, if not judicial accountability and institutional power, what they can offer where institutions have undergone their own attempts, like the International Court of Justice, as we know, where South Africa brought its case of genocide against Israel last year. What do you think is the difference? What are they bringing to the table that those under the auspices of the UN and various legal bodies are not?
Well, I guess the question there is, what are these legal bodies not bringing to the table, right? Because while this is clearly distinct from how the proceedings would be going ahead in the ICC or the ICJ, it has been designed and it is being executed by some of the most renowned global legal experts. And what they have said is that the systems in place, the international courts, the political leaderships, well, they have continuously failed to bring justice for Gaza. And that came today, that case was made by one person who has worked within those systems, had a whole career as a senior human rights official for the UN. This was Craig Mokaba.
The international legal and political system, constructed 80 years ago on the ruins of brutal colonization, unfettered capitalism, wars of aggression, and serial genocide, has failed in its promise of never again. Sometimes by design, and in others through abdication, key components of that system have taken no effective action to prevent or end the genocide, to provide accountability for the perpetrators or a redress for the victims or survivors, or even to name the crime out loud, genocide. Instead, it is deferred to powerful states, including states complicit in the perpetration of these crimes, effectively abandoning the victims and the vulnerable people of Palestine. The exceptions to this general finding, evident in the courageous and principled work of the UN's independent human rights rapporteurs, commissions of inquiry, the ICJ, or the heroism and sacrifice of UNRWA and other humanitarian workers, do not excuse the abject failures of the political leadership and the intergovernmental bodies of the UN. But the Chamber, too, reveals that there is an international body beyond and above the Security Council. It is the collective of global civil society, the movements, the unions, the human rights defenders, the peace activists, the people. They have been active where official institutions have been absent, in the people's encampments on university campuses, the people's demonstrations in capitals across the world, the people's marches through the Sinai, the people's flotillas sailing the Mediterranean to break the siege, the people's movements like BDS, and the people's tribunals like this one. And it is these movements of people that provide a light in what has otherwise been one of the darkest moments in human history. I hope the jury will hold them up as beacons of morality and justice, even as you hold accountable the international institutions that in trepidatious deference to power have abandoned their mandates, abandoned the Palestinian people, and abandoned we the peoples of the United Nations. I thank you.
So we've heard a lot there about people's movements, people's power, individual impact, as opposed to the very frustrating stasis of institutions. Which brings me then to ask you, Mathilda, do you think then these proceedings, being unrestrained by some of the interstate tensions that Craig described there, do you think they could have an impact in and of themselves because they're so different in nature?
Tamara. Here to help me answer this question is Penny Green, who is on the steering committee of the Gaza Tribunal. Given that this is not a judicial process and it doesn't have judicial powers, what actual impact are you hoping to achieve in terms of real life change, real life justice for Gaza?
Well, I think I'd pick you up on one point, because I think the international courts don't have any power. They don't have any real power at all to change. They have no enforcement mechanisms. And so they exist, I think, just simply as a symbolic and normative presence. But I think there's great value, particularly in people's tribunals. People's tribunals operate from a very different perspective. They don't rely on lawyers, they don't rely on judges, they don't rely on a courtroom scenario. What we rely on is the history, if you like, of the work of the solidarity movement, the history of the work of Palestinian NGOs in the case of Gaza and the West Bank, and the history of all of the work that has gone in for many years and understandings. And I think it's really important, unlike a court of law, we don't look at the genocide as an event. Courts are forced to look at crimes as events. It's the way in which the law is structured. Most of those of us in this tribunal today embrace the notion of genocide as a process. Genocide is not an event. It's a whole series of interlinked events and structures that I think began in the case of Palestine in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, because that was ultimately a sort of a really shocking example of the dehumanization of the Palestinian people by a colonial state, and that was the Britain.
Right, so you have the freedom to explore this in a way that courts don't. But you say these courts, they don't have power to enact real change. This court may have more power, this tribunal may have more power. What does that power look like? What does that change look like?
Well, I think we draw on the power of civil society. We draw on the power of the organised solidarity movement, who have, if we look historically, have had really significant impacts when it comes to various forms of state crime. And we have at our disposal civil disobedience. We have at our disposal mass demonstrations. We have at our disposal the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement. And, as you well know, the global Samud flotilla, which attempted to create a humanitarian corridor and to break the siege of Gaza. Now, all of these are possibilities for evincing real change. And I think equally important is that all of those actions and the way in which solidarity movements operate is that they, by their very existence, counter the dominant narrative, the narrative that is embodied in Israel's Hasbara propaganda program, and that is simply regurgitated by governments in the West, that Israel is a victim and that the Palestinians are terrorists. And I think that the importance of global civil society, we're coming together as a tribunal to amass a whole range of not only evidence, but we're going to create an archive of that evidence. But everything that we are doing over these 4 days is countering the hegemonic narrative that Israel and the West have tried to impose on populations around the world about Israel-Palestine.
Right.
And so I think we have power, and I think it's about recognizing that power and harnessing that power. And I think one of the key elements of the Gaza Tribunal is in animating civil society, in further animating. I mean, civil society is animated, but something like the People's Tribunal seeks to bring together different activists within the movement, different solidarity groups, all of those who are working in different ways, and some will be through the law. So the wonderful Hind Rajab Foundation that pursues holidaying Israeli genocidaire wherever they attempt to travel. That's a very significant, it's not going to change the world, but it's a very significant part of civil society action. And so I do think that civil society has a tremendous amount of power. We have to recognise that. BDS has been particularly effective, particularly the academic and cultural boycott. Israeli academics are feeling it in very significant ways. And I think that when you can impact a criminal state's economy in various ways, then you are exerting far more power than a decision which we might expect in 10 years' time from an international court.
Okay, so the power of this court is the power of civil society. Should that be the case? Should it fall on civil society? I mean, I don't know, maybe it should. We are all part of this world. Perhaps it should fall on civil society.
Well, I think we don't have many alternatives given the capitalist nature of the world we live in, and capitalism privileges certain classes in our society and certain groups in our society, minority groups, minority classes. And I think we always have to remember the relationship of law to capitalism and the capitalist economy, capitalist relations of production. Law is central. I mean, the existence of law is intimately related to those relations of production, and law exists in order to protect those relations of production. So we shouldn't look to law as being in any way a saviour. That is a really misguided approach. Civil society, it needs a great deal of work. It doesn't come necessarily easily, but all of the great changes in our histories have come from below, have come from from ordinary people who have organised through trade unions, organised mass civil disobedience campaigns, who have overturned colonial structures, who've overturned really repressive legislation, who've overturned systems which were abusive and repressive. And that's where real change comes from. So we belong to a really significant tradition. And it's a class-based tradition, and one, I think, which we should be extremely proud of. And we also need constantly to remind ourselves of the power of this tradition and the power of civil society to enact real change. Delivering justice is something that courts cannot do. Delivering accountability, we have... we're going to have to wrap up quite soon. That's okay. Sorry. Delivering justice is courts... I don't think that they can, and I think that taking one or two senior officials before the international court is not a way to deliver accountability or justice. We need real change.
Thank you, Penny Green from the Gaza Tribunal Steering Committee, for joining us on MEELive. That is all that we have time for from Istanbul today. Tamara, back to you.
That was Mathilda joining us from Istanbul. Remember, you can keep up to date with her brilliant reporting from the Gaza Tribunal proceedings on MEE's social media pages. Now, for today, that's all we have time for. But before we go, we want to hear from you. Please send in your thoughts and questions to @MiddleEastEye on any social platform, or email meelive@middleeasteye.net. We'll be here at 5 p.m. British Standard Time, which is noon in New York, every Tuesday and Thursday. See you then.